Seattle Seahawks take on the Washington football team in tonight's Monday Night Football matchup. This short is brought to you by Footballguys.com. Save time, worry less, and win more with us. The over-under tonight is 47 points. Primetime has not been very kind to us lately with these matchups, but we proceed. Two teams struggling to find their way. Let's see if they can take advantage of these plus matchups tonight. Let's get into the fantasy impacts for these players, starting with the quarterback position. We're going to head on over to footballguys.com and show you our game logs by team. Russell Wilson, just hearing his name likely makes you wince a little bit if he's on your fantasy team. The Seahawks have scored just 13 points in his last two starts. All of these points came against Arizona last week, and in these games, Russ has thrown for 207 yards or less, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, as you can see here in our game logs. And he's been the QB 25 overall in this time span. This poor level of play has affected all fantasy players around him, unfortunately. They just can't seem to get things going. Luckily, this is a get-right spot for him. If you go over to our tool at footballguys.com, we will show you the fantasy points allowed to each position. You can toggle on the left here by position. You can see that on the season, Washington is giving up the most fantasy points to the quarterback position for the year, but since week 7, they're only giving up the 9th most points per game to quarterbacks. Not quite as bad, but still pretty good. This is a spot where Russ should be able to cook. Washington's given up 24 passing touchdowns this year. Only the New York Jets have been worse, which bodes well for Russell Wilson tonight. He's got to build up that confidence, and if he can't perform here for us, I think it's time to send him to the bench for the rest of the season until we see some good fantasy production. On the other side of the ball, Taylor Heinecke, quietly the QB 13 overall since week 7. He's getting it done. Seattle's defense is middle of the pack against QBs, giving up the 15th fewest points to the position since week 7. I still think Heinecke will perform as a high-end QB2 tonight. I'm certainly starting him in 2 QB leagues and some 1 QB leagues as well. He's thrown for 462 yards and 4 touchdowns, completing 77% of his passes over their last 2 wins. And Seattle has allowed the 4th most passing yards in the NFL this entire year. We saw Colt McCoy light them up last week, over 300 yards and 2 scores, filling in for Kyler Murray. So Heineke's chance of finding success is pretty good tonight. Let's move on to the running back position. The Seahawks have not been as effective on the ground lately in general without Chris Carson in their backfield. This committee of Alex Collins, Rashad Penny, Travis Homer, DeeJayy Dallas, they've been pretty abysmal on the ground. They've only totaled 127 yards combined together in the last 2 weeks. Worth noting, last week on the first carry of the game, Rashad Penny suffered a hamstring injury. He's not at risk of going back on IR, which would end his season, and he is out tonight. I expect to see a committee of Alex Collins and DeeJayy Dallas. Dallas is a sneaky stash for your bench for future matchups. He could pull away from Collins in these next 2 weeks. They both played 37% of the snaps last week. But I will preface this with, if you're relying on one of these guys to win tonight, best to maybe watch a movie and check your lineups after the game is over, because it might be ugly. Washington giving up the 11th fewest points per game to running backs since week 7. They're more susceptible on being beat through the air, but I expect the ground game to be a little bit better than the last few weeks for the Seahawks. On the other side of the ball for Washington, Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissic still in somewhat of a committee based on the game script. Of course, in games with positive game script, Gibson tends to take over the touch count. In weeks 6 through 8, McKissic was playing more snaps due to this game script and Gibson's injuries, but Gibson has come back from the bye stronger. His injuries are good to go. He had his largest workload of the season with 24 total touches in week 10, another strong 19-touch game last week, even after he was relegated to the bench for a short time after he fumbled. Gibson was a my guy this season, so I've been a little bit disappointed relative to where, of course, you drafted him. I've had him on the bench for quite some time, but I am starting Gibson everywhere tonight. I expect Washington to be in a positive game streak. And since week 7, Seattle's giving up the 2nd most points per game to the running back position, which I love for Gibson tonight. Moving on to the wide receivers. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett for the Seahawks are the overall wide receiver 28 and 30 respectively since week 7. Relative to ADP, that's pretty disappointing. Of course, they're affected by this Russell Wilson injury and recent bad games. On the year, Washington has given up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers, but since week 7, they've been right in the middle of the pack, so they've improved a little bit over these last few weeks. I'm willing to play both of these guys tonight. Similarly to Russ, if they can't get it done, then it's time to worry, but they should produce as at least high-end wide receiver 2s tonight. On the flip side, Seattle's given up the 8th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers since week 7. But Terry McLaurin, of course, for the Washington football team, is in your lineup tonight as a high-end wide receiver too. He's the overall PPR wide receiver 16 since week 7. He has the ability to boom in any game. He's had a safe floor over the last 2 weeks, at least 5 receptions and 59 yards in both games. I wouldn't recommend any other Washington wide receiver here as more than just a dart throw wide receiver 4 or 5. Lastly, for the tight end position, Seattle tight ends, they have been pretty much unplayable for the majority of the year. Gerald Everett has had a decent stat line the last 2 weeks, but over at footballguys.com, we have Everett projected at tight end 19 for this week, so I'm not playing him anywhere. Washington's also just middle of the pack against tight ends, giving up the 15th fewest points. On the other side of the ball, Logan Thomas for Washington, set to make his return from IR tonight. He has not played since week 4. Washington could definitely use Logan Thomas in the middle of the field. I would plug him right back into my lineup. Seattle's giving up the 5th most points to the tight end position. Him and McLaurin are the only pass catchers I'm playing for Washington now. As always, head over to footballguys.com to use our awesome free tools like the snap share, game logs, as you see here, and so much more each week to set your perfect lineup. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck with your matchups tonight.